Hello and welcome to Face Off here on France 24. During the first 4 years of his mandate, President François Hollande avoided major street demonstrations and strikes, proudly arguing that it was the result of his emphasis on social dialogue and gradual reforms. Well, he seems to have lost his magic touch if you have been watching the news in recent days. Blockades of oil refineries, long lines at gas stations, strikes, demonstration, even scuffles with the police, and a nasty war of words between the government and one of France's major trade unions. With me to discuss the social unrest and its political consequences, Jean-Marc Gonin with Le Figaro magazine, and Philip Turl with Radio France Internationale. So the official reason for this social unrest is a controversial bill to reform the labor rules in this country that the government forced through parliament despite opposition from a part of its own socialist camp. But now, the leftist trade union CGT has decided to go for the jugular.
Cleared with water cannons and tear gas in the early hours of the morning. Security forces stepped in as the blockade at the Fos-sur-Mer oil depot in southern France looked to run into a third day. Both sides reported injuries from the operation. The blockade alone had caused fuel shortages at hundreds of petrol stations in the southeast of the country. Riot police also intervened at several other depots, but strike action is underway at all 8 of France's refineries over controversial labour reforms.
We're going to cause a fuel shortage. We hear from parts of the media there won't be one for 3 weeks because of the reserves. But in under a week we've had strikes all over the country and there are already shortages. They need to find some more credible lies.
Workers at the Le Havre oil import terminal have also voted to join the strike, a move which could increase disruption. Almost half the country's crude stock passes through the port. Around 20% of France's 12,000 petrol stations have already either run dry or are running low on resources. The crisis has even forced some in the northeast of the country to cross the border into Belgium in search of fuel.
I think there's easily 30 or 40% more than usual. We kind of hope it lasts, although we don't want it to be that bad.
French Prime Minister Manuel Valls has called the strike blackmail, but insists there's no reason to panic. The government says, if necessary, it has enough emergency reserves to last for 90 days.
So clearly lots of tensions on the streets here across France, and lots of tensions between the CGT, trade union, and the government. Let's take a listen first to the Secretary General of the CGT, Philippe Martinez, and to the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls.
We are determined to see this through to finish, the withdrawal of the labor law. Otherwise, there will be more strikes. Who's responsible for this tense social environment in France for the past month? Perhaps even since the beginning of Hollande's presidency. Well, it's him and his prime minister because they don't want to listen.
We are not going to remove the bill, because then we wouldn't be able to reform the country. The CGT union will be met with an extremely clear and firm response from the government. We will continue to clear the sites, the depots that are currently being blockaded by the organization.
And the French President François Hollande himself saying this Tuesday on the radio that those actions were carried out by a minority. Very unusual to see a leftist government in direct confrontation with a trade union.
Yes, this is unusual, but it's the result of two radicalization on both sides, I would say. When Manuel Valls was appointed prime minister, he wanted to push through radical reforms, and that's what we are up to now. And the reform that is now being contested.
Which is not that radical, by the way.
It is not. It has been watered down a lot, but in the eyes of his own left and of the trade union that is pushing those blockades, is organizing the struggle, it is much too radical in their eyes. But Valls is a man who wants to stand firm. It is part of his own image, so he will go all the way. That's what he says, and he keeps on saying. He's forced it through Parliament. Now he wants to force it down the union's throat. On the other side, the CGT is also on a radicalized line. It has had an internal crisis in the last years, and especially last year, and it has elected this man, Philippe Martinez, who as his head. And Philippe Martinez has taken a very leftist line too, so he can't afford to compromise because he's been elected on that very firm line.
In addition, there are calls for more strikes in the transportation system, more demonstration. Is there a risk for the government that this is out of control? We already hear the opposition saying the government doesn't control anything, it doesn't control its majority in parliament, it doesn't control people on the streets, it doesn't control the trade unions. France is going down the drain.
Well, what the government, I think, is hoping is that the longer this lasts, the more people are going to get tired with this movement and it will become unpopular, and that will force the CGT and the strikers to go back to work because people won't support their movement. For the moment, there is a very small, less than a majority of French people support this movement, but there are a large amount of people in French society who do support it, who don't want this law to go through, who have some sympathy towards what the CGT is doing. It all depends on how long this lasts, how much people are going to suffer without being able to fill their cars up, whether they're going to be able to get to work, whether products are going to be delivered to shops where there's going to be all sorts of problems in obtaining everyday goods to eat and transport and services and taxes and things like that, and whether people can go to work. So if this carries on for a foreseeable period, both the government, I think, and the union will suffer. The problem here is that neither side can afford to back down. The government can't afford to back down on this labour law because they fear they're going to lose all credibility, having backed down on another law earlier this year on taking away the nationality of those who are convicted of terrorism, which they didn't manage to push through Parliament. So they staked all their reputation on this law. And as Jean-Marc was saying, the CGT is also staking its reputation on winning this fight because it's losing support within the union movement to other unions which are picking up some of its members. So it's taking a more radical stance, which is the only way that it's going to win back, it thinks, support from those who've already gone to look elsewhere.
To support what President Hollande has said about it, it's really a minority. When you look at the figures of the mobilization on the streets, the demonstrations, which is the first way to show your hostility towards a law. Well, those figures have been plummeting in the last weeks, very, very heavily.
We haven't seen mass protests in the street, that's
exactly.
They've
and
gone
it's
down.
getting smaller and smaller. So the CGT is using a tactics that is really a sort of minimax tactic, a minimum of mobilization and maximum of trouble you put into the country. But it doesn't say that so many French people are backing that sort of action.
It's a more radical part of the union that is causing this blockade, whereas in previous weeks we've seen more people in support of the withdrawal of the labour law. That support has fallen, but we've seen emerging a more radical part of the unions who are determined to go right, brinkmanship, if you like, right to the last straw to get this law withdrawn, and they will not stop at anything. And that's not going to receive the support, I don't think, of most of the French people.
So in a way, this could be a good thing for the government, or because what the demonstrators, or let's say those who are taking action, are saying, the government is not listening. In Parliament, it uses this Article 49.3 of the Constitution, which allows a bill to be adopted without a vote. If they don't listen, we have to make ourselves heard.
Yes, that's what they say. But if you look at what happened in Parliament, of course, they used a special article that adopted the law without any debate
Without any vote.
Yes, without any vote. But there was a censorship vote, a vote of confidence on the government that was won by government. So it's like when you say the law is unpopular in France. It was not that unpopular, but people get tired of having those protests keep on in the country. But I don't think a majority of French people are really against that text, that very bill.
But for the government, is there a risk? Because, as I said in the introduction, François Hollande said, In contrast to Nicolas Sarkozy, who is rather seen as brutal and so on, I'm going to make sure France is a country where there's social democracy, where unions talk to each other, to the government. And now we see this. So clearly, this is, again, something that will be held against him. Or could it win him the favor of maybe more conservative circles that are saying, OK, we have to support him because he's facing a minority that's trying to hurt him?
I don't think that's going to happen right now because François Hollande is very unpopular in France and there's a growing hostility towards him, towards his presidency, towards all the errors that have been committed over the last 4 years while he's been in office. And this employment law, this new labour law, is just one of the, I think, badly organised policies that the government has come up with too late in the mandate. It should have been brought in a lot earlier. It's been brought in too late, which has inspired those who are against the government. And the government was already unpopular when it came up with its plan to take hold of it, to use it as a way of fighting against the government. I think that this labour law has almost become a smokescreen for a much wider unrest in France against the government or dissatisfaction with politics in general, and it's being used as an excuse for lots of people to come forward and say, well, we're really unhappy with François Hollande, we're unhappy with the way the government's working, we're unhappy with Manuel Valls, the Prime Minister, we're unhappy with the Socialist Party split. There's all these problems that need to be sorted out. There's rising unemployment still in France after 4 years of François Hollande in office. Why hasn't the government done something about it? And this is just exacerbated a situation that's got even more out of control, and the CGT has also used it to try to win back support. So we're in a very difficult and tense situation, and I don't think there's an easy way out right now.
Okay, we'll obviously continue to follow very closely this social unrest and what it could mean for François Hollande and the government of Manuel Valls. Thank you for watching this edition of Face Off. See you next week.